The envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally picked it up. I kept walking past it. Morning coffee, I'd glance at it. Coming home from work, I'd set my keys down 2 inches away from it. My husband noticed. He didn't say anything, which was the kindest thing he could have done. The return address was my brother's attorney's office in Phoenix. I already knew what was inside. Before I get into it, I want to ask you something in the comments. What's the hardest thing to lose when a family falls apart? Is it the people, the memories, or the thing you never thought you'd have to fight over? I'm 31 years old and I never wanted to be the kind of person who had a story like this. But here I am. My name is Elaine. My brother's name is Conrad. And the house we grew up in. The house our mother spent 40 years of her life in. The house where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway. Where she hung the same wreath on the front door every November. That house became the thing that ended us. I need to back up. Our mother, her name was June, passed away in January. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast the way it always does. She was diagnosed in October, and by Christmas she could barely sit up on her own. I flew out to Phoenix from Nashville 4 times in those 3 months. Conrad lived 20 minutes from her and came twice. I don't say that to score points. I say it because it matters to what happened next. Mom had a will. She'd had one since my father died in 2009. After Dad passed, she updated it. A lawyer friend of hers helped her, someone from her church. The will was simple. The house in Phoenix, her savings account, and her car went to be split equally between Conrad and me, 50-50. She said it out loud to both of us, sitting at her kitchen table 2 Thanksgivings before she got sick. Equal, she said, because that's what you both are to me. Conrad nodded. I nodded. We had pie. She died on a Wednesday morning in January. I held her hand. Conrad arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after she passed. He'd gotten stuck in traffic, he said. The weeks after that were a blur. I handled the funeral arrangements because Conrad said he wasn't good with that stuff. I dealt with the funeral home, the obituary, the reception afterward at her church. I called relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I organized her closet and donated her clothes and found a folder in her nightstand that had the name of her attorney, a man named Gerald Whitfield, and a note in her handwriting that said, "Everything is taken care of, don't fight." I put that note in my purse. I've looked at it 100 times since. The will was read 3 weeks after the funeral. Conrad and I sat in Gerald Whitfield's office across a glass table, and everything was exactly as Mom had said. The house, the savings, the car, split down the middle. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Conrad had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Scottsdale with his girlfriend at the time. I knew they'd been having problems. She'd told me once over the phone that he was bad with money, that they'd fought about credit card debt more than once. I didn't probe. It wasn't my business. About 6 weeks after the will was read, Conrad called me. He said he wanted to buy me out of my half of the house. I told him I'd think about it. The house had been appraised at $340,000. My half was $170,000. That wasn't nothing. My husband and I weren't struggling, but we had a mortgage of our own and a daughter who was 2 years old. $170,000 would have made a real difference, but I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. I'd been thinking about the house differently. Thinking maybe I wanted it to stay in the family. Thinking maybe someday my daughter would want to see where her grandmother lived. Sentimental, maybe. But it was how I felt. I told Conrad I needed more time. He said, "How much time?" I said, "A few more weeks." He said, "Okay." That was February. By April he stopped asking and started telling. The first sign was a phone call where he mentioned he'd had someone look at the property. I asked what that meant. He said he was just exploring options. I said we hadn't agreed on anything. He said he was just being practical. I let it go. The second sign was a text in May, saying he'd had a contractor come through to assess what updates might help the sale. I called him immediately. "Sale," I said. "We haven't decided to sell." He said he was just being prepared, just in case we decided to list it. I said we were co-owners and any decision to involve both of us. He said, "Obviously, I know that, Elaine. I should have pushed harder, I know that now." The third sign came in June, when I found out from my aunt, my mom's younger sister, who still lived in Phoenix and drove past the house sometimes, that there was a realtor's lockbox on the front door. I called Conrad from my car, in the parking lot of a Target, while my daughter was asleep in her car seat. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "There's a lockbox on Mom's front door." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I was going to tell you." I said, "Tell me what, Conrad?" He said he'd already accepted an offer. Someone had come in at $355,000, above asking. He said he'd listed it quietly, just to test the market. He said the closing was in 3 weeks. I couldn't speak for a moment. When I found my voice, I said, You listed a property that is half mine without my knowledge or consent. He said it's complicated. I said it wasn't complicated at all. He said, look, I needed to move fast. These things don't wait. And you were being emotional about the house, which I get, but at some point we have to be realistic. Emotional. Like I was some obstacle he had to work around. Like my name on that deed was an inconvenience. I hung up. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. My daughter woke up and started babbling from her car seat, and I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, thinking about my mother's note in my purse. Don't fight. But here's the thing. I'm a paralegal. I have been for 7 years. I work for a family law firm in Nashville. And while real estate isn't exactly my specialty, I know enough. I know that a co-owner cannot sell jointly held property without the consent of the other co-owner. I know what tenants in common means. I know that an accepted offer on a property where the seller didn't have full authority to sell is not a done deal. I called my boss from the parking lot. She answered on the first ring. Because she always does. I explained what happened. She was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, Elaine, he cannot legally close on that sale without your signature. She said, do you want me to refer you to someone in Arizona? I said, yes, please. By the following morning, I had spoken to a real estate attorney in Phoenix named Carol Huang. She pulled the deed, confirmed what I already knew, and sent a letter to the buyer's agent, the listing agent, and Conrad's attorney, who, as it turned out, Conrad had already retained, informing all parties that the listing and the accepted offer were invalid because one co-owner had not consented to the sale. The closing did not happen in 3 weeks. Conrad called me the day after the letter went out. He wasn't quiet this time. He said I was blowing up a deal because I was being petty. He said I was punishing him for trying to be practical. He said Mom would be disappointed in how I was acting. I let him say all of it. I didn't interrupt. Then I said, Conrad, I want you to hear me clearly. I did not consent to that listing. I did not consent to that offer. You tried to sell my inheritance without my knowledge. This is not me being emotional. This is me protecting what our mother left to both of us equally, which is what she wanted. He said, so what do you want? To just keep the house forever? Live in it? I said, I want to be included in every decision about that property. That's it. That's all I've ever wanted. He hung up. What came next was 3 months of the worst kind of quiet. The kind where nobody yells, nobody cries, but everything underneath is broken. Carol advised me on our options. We could petition for partition, essentially asking a court to either physically divide the property or force a sale and split the proceeds. We could negotiate a buyout, either he buys me out or I buy him out. Or we could agree to list it together, with both of us fully informed and consenting, and split the proceeds. I did not want to go to court. Not because I was afraid of losing. Carol thought we had a strong case, but because I kept hearing my mother's voice. Don't fight. I reached out to Conrad in September. I said I was willing to discuss all 3 options. I asked him to come to the table. He agreed. We had one meeting, over video call, with both attorneys present. Conrad's opening position was that he wanted to buy me out at the original appraised value from January, $170,000. Not accounting for the 8 months that had passed, or the above asking offer he'd already received, that proved the market value was higher. Carol said we'd consider a buyout at fair market value based on a new appraisal. Conrad's attorney said they'd circle back. They did not circle back. What Conrad did instead was stop paying the property taxes. The house had property taxes due in October. Arizona does 2 installments, October and March. Conrad had been managing the financial side of the estate since Mom passed, since he was local and I wasn't. I'd assumed he was handling it. He wasn't. Carol found out when she pulled a title search in November. The first installment, $1,800, was unpaid. There were late fees accumulating. I paid it myself. I called the Maricopa County Assessor's office, gave them my card number, and paid it over the phone. When I told Conrad, he said, good. You should be contributing to the expenses. I looked at my phone for a long moment after he said that. There was a version of me. The version from before all this. Who would have cried? Who would have called my mom and talked through it for an hour, and she would have told me to give him grace, that he was grieving too, that people do strange things when they lose a parent. But my mother wasn't there to call anymore. And the strangeness had started to feel less like grief and more like strategy. In December, Conrad's girlfriend moved out of his apartment. My aunt told me, not Conrad. A few weeks later, my aunt also told me that Conrad had been asking around about whether he could get a loan against the house. Using it as collateral. Without my signature, he could not. Carol confirmed it. But the fact that he was asking told me everything I needed to know about the timeline. About the rush in June. About why he hadn't waited for me, hadn't asked, hadn't even called to say, I think we should talk about the house. It had never been about the house for him. It had been about the money inside the house. I'm not angry about that anymore. I was for a long time. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning running through the sequence of events, adding up what he'd tried to take, what he'd thought he could get away with. I'd rehearse conversations in my head, say things I'd never actually say. The way you do when someone has wronged you, and the wrong is just sitting there, unresolved. But I made a decision in January, almost exactly a year after my mother died. I decided to buy him out, not because I was surrendering, because I finally knew what I wanted. I wanted the house. I wanted to keep it. I wanted to drive to Phoenix once a year and stand in the kitchen, where my mother made coffee every morning for 40 years, and I wanted my daughter to know where she came from. That was worth more to me than being right. Carol negotiated the buyout over the course of 6 weeks. We commissioned a new appraisal. The house came in at $362,000, which meant my brother's half was worth $181,000. I got a home equity loan on my Nashville house. It wasn't painless. My husband and I had a lot of conversations about whether it made sense, whether the math worked, whether I was making an emotional decision. I told him yes, I was making an emotional decision. And I was okay with that. We closed on the buyout in February. Conrad signed the quitclaim deed that transferred his interest in the property to me. His attorney sent over the paperwork. Everything was signed, notarized, filed. The house is mine now fully. My name is the only one on the deed. I flew to Phoenix the week after we closed. I let myself in with the key I've had since I was 17 years old. I walked through every room. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard, at the lemon tree my mother planted the year I was born, still there, still producing lemons, like it has no idea what's happened. Conrad and I haven't spoken since the closing. He got his money. I got the house. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, I lost my brother. Or maybe I lost the version of him I thought I knew, which is a different kind of loss. My daughter is 3 now. She calls the Phoenix house Grammy's house. She doesn't fully understand what that means yet. Someday I'll tell her about the year I spent fighting for it, quietly, legally, without shouting, without crumbling, without once doing the thing my brother expected me to do, which was give up. And I'll tell her that Grammy left a note that said don't fight. I read that note 100 times, trying to figure out what she meant. I think she meant don't let the house become more important than the people. But the people had already made their choice, so I made mine. I kept the house. I kept my daughter's inheritance. I kept the lemon tree. Some things are worth holding on to. And knowing the difference between holding on and holding back is the only thing that got me through.